Welcome to our introduction to the Vietnam War. This conflict spanning from 1955 to 1975 left an enduring impact on the Vietnam and the world. The Vietnam War was a struggle for control independence, with Communist North Vietnam as its allies fighting against anti-communist forces in South Vietnam, supported by the United States and other allies. National interest shaped global events as the United States saw Vietnam as a battleground in the Cold War, aiming to prevent the spread of communism. Meanwhile, North Vietnam sought to reunify the country under the communist rule. This conflict wasn't just about Vietnam, it became a proxy war between superpowers, with each side seeking to advance its ideological agenda. The Vietnam War was marked by guerrilla warfare, protests, and significant loss of life. It was a war that divided nations and sparked movement for peace around the world. In the following segment, we'll delve deeper into the key events, strategies, and consequences of Vietnam War. Join us as we explore this complex and consequential chapter in history.
This section highlights the ideological gap between the Soviet Union-led Eastern Bloc and the United States-led Western Bloc as it discusses the geopolitical context of the Cold War. It talks about how the dominatory and the development of communism affected Western policies, especially in the Southeast Asian countries. The war was split into two ideological blocs during the Cold War: the Communism bloc of the Soviet Union and the members of the Warsaw Pact led the Eastern Bloc, while the United States and its members of NATO headed the Western Bloc. The Cold War was marked geopolitically by fierce rivalry, ideological strife, and proxy wars waged all over the world. The Soviet Union's communism opposed the Western capitalism and democracy throughout the Cold War. The stability and interests of Western nations were considered to be challenged by communism. According to the dominatory, if one nation adopts communism, the other nation will do the same, like dominoes falling. This had an impact on Western policy, particularly in regions like Southeast Asia, where communism looked to be growing. People in Vietnam battled to be free of their nation's rule. This was combined with the Cold War, which was an ideological conflict. Vietnam was split into two sections following an agreement in 1954: the Communism North and the Anti-Communism South. The United States provided financial support and military assistance to the Southern administration because it believes that South Vietnam was crucial to stopping the expansion of communism in the area. During the Cold War, the Vietnam War gained significant importance as the U.S. attempted to stop the expansion of communism in the area. However, both money and lives were lost during the protracted conflict. Ultimately, communism ruled over all of Vietnam began in 1975 after the Second Fall. In summary, the Vietnam War illustrates how conflict between nations and ideologies influenced global affairs through the Cold War. This shows us how decisions and attitudes made in one country may have significant impact on people all around the world.
During the Cold War, the United States perceived its national interest in containing the spread of communism. Particularly in Southeast Asia, the policy of containment articulated by George F. Kennan aimed to prevent the expansion of Soviet influence and communism around the world. This perception of national interest led the U.S. to become deeply involved in the Vietnam War. The Gulf of Tonkin. The Gulf of Tonkin incident role in escalating U.S. military involvement in Vietnam. In August 1964, the U.S. Navy destroyer reported an alleged attack by North Vietnam torpedo boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. The incident prompted President Lyndon B. Johnson to seek congressional approval for military action. As a response to the Gulf of Tonkin incident, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution on August 7, 1964, which granted President Johnson the authority to use military force in Vietnam. This resolution effectively gave the president a blank check to escalate U.S. involvement in conflict without a formal declaration of war. It marked a significant turning point as it expanded the U.S. commitment from providing military assistance to South Vietnam to direct involvement in combat operations. The perception of a direct threat to the U.S. national interest, combined with the desire to contain the spirit of communism, led to escalation of U.S. military involvement in Vietnam. Over time, the commitment deepened, with increased troop deployment and a shift from advisory roles to active combat operations. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution became a controversial and debated aspect of U.S. history, as it set the stage for prolonged and costly war that had far-reaching consequences for both the United States and Vietnam. Let's delve into the U.S. perception of its national interest in containing communism and to the Gulf of Tonkin incident. First perspective of national interest is the Cold War context. The Cold War rivalry the United States and the Soviet Union created a global ideological struggle. The U.S. saw communism as a direct challenge to its democratic and capitalist value. The dominant theory, a belief that the fall of one Southeast Asian nation to communism could trigger a chain reaction. Further, it intensified the U.S. commitment to preventing the spread of communism. The second one is escalation of military involvement. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution became the legal basis for substantial increase in U.S. military presence in Vietnam. Troop deployments escalated from a few thousand military advisors to a full-scale commitment of ground troops. The United States became deeply entangled in the Vietnam War, leading to prolonged conflict with significant human and financial costs. From the conclusion of the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the resulting resolution reflected to the broader U.S. policy of containment during the Cold War, the fear of communism spread combined with the perceived threat in the Gulf of Tonkin justified the significant escalation in military involvement. The Vietnam War, sparked and intensified by these events, would ultimately become a divisive and protracted conflict with lasting implications for both the United States and the region. During the Cold War, the United States perceived its national interest in containing the spread of communism.
Next up, what is the military strategies or tactics that we use on the Vietnam War? We are going to explain about it now, both America and Vietnam. But let's start with America first. American tactics in Vietnam can be summed up by the acronym BEAST, or which is stand for by bombing, escalations, air and artillery, search and destroy, and technology. First one is bombing. President Johnson ordered the bombing of strategic military targets in North Vietnam, including air raids on the capital city Hanoi and bases and supply routes for the Viet Cong. This was codenamed Operation Rolling Thunder. The USA would ultimately drop 3 million tons of bombs in Vietnam, more than all the bombs dropped in Europe during World War II. However, bombing was highly inaccurate due to the jungle landscape and the lack of industrial targets in North Vietnam. The second strategies or tactics by the American that was used in the Vietnam War is escalations. President Johnson slowly increased the number of American troops on the ground in Vietnam. In 1965, 2 battalions of U.S. Marines were deployed to protect military bases at Da Nang. This represented a shift away from military advisors to combat troops. In July 1965, Johnson sent another 100,000 troops and a further 100,000 troops in 1966. The third strategy by the American is air and artillery. American troops were sent on patrols to be supported by air and artillery if attacked by the Viet Cong. This demoralized soldiers who realized they were being used as bait to draw out the enemy. The fourth strategy is search and destroy. From 1965, the American military began a policy of sending soldiers into the jungle and villages of Vietnam to take the war to the enemy. This often meant soldiers were easy targets for Viet Cong guerrilla attacks, as the Viet Cong were far more at home in the jungle than American soldiers. This tactic also led to a high number of civilian casualties, destruction of villages, and atrocities like the My Lai massacre, all of which damaged the USA's reputations. Last one is technology. By using technology, the USA relied on high-altitude bombers to drop heavy bombs in North Vietnam. They used jets to dump napalm, a chemical that burns skin down to the bone, unsuspected Viet Cong strongholds, and Agent Orange. An ultra-strong defoliant was used to destroy the jungle cover. Helicopters were used to deploy, search for, and destroy guerrilla combatants. Television's propaganda was used in the USA to report the body count of estimated Viet Cong casualties. Now, we're gonna discuss about the Viet Cong tactics in Vietnam can be summed up by the acronym PAC, which stand for Peasants, Enemy, and Guerrilla. The first one is Peasants. It's time for the Vietnam tactics that was used on the Vietnam Wars, where they against the U.S. Military. The Viet Cong treated the peasants in the villages with respect, sometimes even helping them with their workloads in the fields. They needed the peasants to give them food, shelter, and hiding places. Enemy. The second tactics that was used in the Vietnam War is by the Vietnam is enemy. Land then was taken from the large landowner will be given to the peasants. The Viet Cong encouraged a fear amongst the peasants that American and South Vietnamese would take this land back. They would frustrate the Americans by simple tactics, retreating when the enemy attacks, raiding enemy camps, attacking the enemy when they were tired, pursuing the enemy when they retreated. And the last tactics or military strategies that was used by the Vietnam or the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War is guerrilla. The Viet Cong made sure they picked battles they would be able to win. Weapons included daggers and swords, and explosive captured from the Americans to ambush patrols. Booby traps were made from pointed bamboo sticks, mines, grenades, and artillery shells. The Viet Cong wore no uniform and could not be found in any particular locations. Tunnels existed for them to escape into the jungle. The cells they worked in were very small so that if they captured, they could not be tortured for information about others. There was all the tactics and strategies that was used during the Vietnam War. And now we are going to discuss about the challenges US faced in the guerrilla warfare settings. First up is terrain and environment. Vietnam's dense jungles, swamps, and intricate network of tunnels provided perfect cover for guerrilla fighters. The terrain made it difficult for conventional US forces to detect and engage guerrilla units effectively. The environment also posed logistical challenges for supplying troops and conducting operations. Second is guerrilla tactics. Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces employed hit-and-run tactics, abuses, booby traps, and camouflage effectively. This asymmetrical warfare negated many of the traditional advantages of the US military, such as superior firepower and technology. The ability of guerrilla fighters to blend in with the local populations also made it hard to distinguish enemy combatants from civilians. And the third challenge is lack of clear front lines. Unlike conventional warfare, where front lines are clearly defined, guerrilla warfare blurred the lines between combat zone and civilian areas. This made it difficult for US forces to identify and engage enemy forces without risking civilians' casualties or being drawn into protracted battles. And the last, challenges that was faced by the U.S. during the Vietnam War back then is support from the local populations. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army received significant support from the local population, including shelter, supplies, and intelligence. This made it challenging for U.S. forces to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people and undermine support for the guerrilla movement.
So, as we delve into the conclusion of the Vietnam War, let's explore the aftermath and the lasting impact on both the United States and the Vietnam. In April 1975, the fall of Saigon marks the end of the war, as North Vietnamese forces captured the capital of South Vietnam. This event led to the reunification of Vietnam under the communist control, fulfilling the long-fought nationalist aspirations of the Vietnamese people. However, victory came at a staggering human cost. The war left millions dead, and its impact extended far beyond the battlefield. The physical and emotional scars endured by veterans and civilians alike underscored the profound toll of armed conflict. The war's legacy reverberated in U.S. foreign policy, prompting a more cautious approach to military interventions. The so-called Vietnam Syndrome emerged, cautioning against the entanglement in conflicts without clear objectives or public support. As we reflect on the outcome and legacy of the Vietnam War, it becomes evident that the scars left by this conflict transcend borders and generations. Join us in the next segment as we conclude our journey through the Vietnam War, examining its broader implementations and implications on history and national interest. So, as we come to our conclusion and the end of our video, let's look at some key points and summarize some takeaways and consider broader implications of this historical chapter, which is the Vietnam War and its takeaways from national interest driven into war. So pretty much throughout our journey, we have very much witnessed how national interest played a very despicable and very pivotal role throughout the course of the Vietnam War. The pursuit of ideological objectives, geopolitical influences, and the desire to contain communism framed the decisions led to this conflict, which led to this very war. The war left a very indelible mark on both the United States and the Vietnam sides, impacting on their societies, on their economies, and their global standing. It serves as a stark and stoic reminder of the complexities and consequences associated with the pursuit of national interest throughout military resources and military power. The Vietnam War offers valuable and very important lessons for the future of our generations, emphasizing the importance of clear objectives, public support, and the understanding of global potential repercussions on the military engagement side of things. Thank you for joining us in this exploration of the Vietnam War. Remember to reflect on history, don't forget to learn from it, and strive for a world where conflicts are resolved through peace and diplomacy. That's it from us. See you around.